Hey there, Lionesses. This is Bobby Carlton. I am the publisher and editor in chief of Lioness magazine. I am also the founder of Innovation Women, an online speaking bureau for women. Today, we are speaking with Amy Spurling. She's the founder and CEO of Compt, which is an employee perk stipend software company. Comp just recently announced a $13 million Series A investment. So welcome, Amy, and congrats on the big bucks.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Now, that is incredibly impressive to pull in that amount of money because we all know that women-founded companies get only a very small percentage of
smaller.
The VC dollars. Yes, very small. So tell me, how did you beat the odds?
My story isn't super unique. You do twice as much to get where you need to go. We made sure that, we stayed true to what we needed to build and focused on building a great company, which resulted in a lot of our hypotheses around why we were building this came to fruition and were proven out correct through the pandemic in particular, supporting the needs of everyone with very diverse situations. And so our metrics were pretty stellar, and that set us up to be in a really good position for our Series A earlier this year. So but there literally wasn't a single metric we had that wasn't off the charts stellar as well. So, it's great that the business got to that point. But you got to have perfection.
All right. Now, when we were talking before this conversation, you mentioned a somewhat unique idea for securing funding. Number one, you need to tell us what that was. And number two, did you end up doing it?
Well, this was early days. I was thinking, I was doing a lot of Boston to San Francisco flights, around the angel round and things like that. You start prepping for your Series A when you start a company, even though it's going to be years later. So, every one of my flights, JetBlue flights, Monday morning, to Friday night, they were full of VCs. So I joked with friends that I was just going to hijack the front end of the plane, make everybody sit there and listen to my pitch for 6 straight hours until somebody, wrote a check. I didn't actually do that, of course. But it's like, you've got a captive audience here. This seems like a really good place to be fundraising, is just the front end of the JetBlue flight.
Oh, now you were fundraising though during the pandemic. What did that do to your fundraising effort?
It's a strange scenario. I've been part of 6 companies prior to this, have been part of raising lots and lots of rounds. I think 15, 16 rounds at this point prior to starting Compt, and all of them, lots of flights. You're flying around the country, you're pitching these folks. We haven't raised a single dollar from a flight in this company. That is unheard of. Going all the way back to our seed round, hadn't met my seed round investors in person. It was all being done through Zoom. And that started, January, February of 2020. So right before the pandemic. So all of our fundraising was really done virtually, which was it was a very interesting, very different dynamic. I found it just to be kind of a breath of fresh air, honestly. It's so much more efficient, but it's definitely a different approach.
All right. I took us way off track talking specifically about funding and hijacking planes. Tell me about Compt. How did you get the idea for this? What does it do, first off?
Sure. So what it does is it's employee perk stipends and manages these stipends for employees. The concept is really your employees, everybody wants something different. You need to have some sort of a strategy here. Salary, health insurance, those are check the box. Employees are not, they expect it to be, there, but you got to do something to differentiate if you really want the best talent and to differentiate from your competitors. Stipends are a great way to reach everyone instead of the small sliver of the team that might want childcare, that might want student loan repayment, or might want bungee jumping or whatever the thing is. Doing this allows for a much more broad-based approach to reach everyone. The idea came from being a CFO and COO for so long because back when we had doors on offices and we were in person, it was a revolving door of people. Everybody, no matter what cool benefit we rolled out, there'd be a line of people like, I don't want that. Why can't I have something else? Which is frustrating for finance and HR teams who are just trying to support the team, but employees weren't wrong. You need to get to personalization. You can't have a one size fits all. Not everybody needs student loan repayment. Not everybody who needs student loan repayment wants to use the one app you might bring in. You've got to find a different way to support people where they are in a way that they want to be supported, and treat your employees like adults.
Wow. And I imagine today, with the way the hiring market is and trying to keep valuable employees, this becomes even more important.
It does. You've got to figure out a way to compete for that talent. And it's never going to be just the escalating salaries, because companies can't afford it. So you've got to find a way to reach everyone and be meaningful to this talent that is really critical to retain. But at the same time, without having an unlimited budget, it's like, how do you get the most utilization? Normal employee perks, staggeringly underutilized. So normal stuff is like 3 to 5% of the team. Student loan repayment, childcare, food, whatever the thing is, 3 to 5%. That's all you get of the team to use it. So it's very expensive, which means in a recession, CFO and me is like, chop, chop, chop. You gotta get rid of some of that stuff because you can't afford it. But then the people who loved the thing that you chopped, they've got nothing, and they're going to go somewhere else. Whereas with a stipend, you can say, all right, we support wellness. Everybody has X dollars to spend on it. Oh, shoot, recession. Now X dollars went to Y dollars, but you still have whatever you want. It's just a much more holistic approach that can still reach everyone, regardless of where a company is.
That sounds like a really great approach. Some startups get distracted by customer asks, like from their early customers, that might not be representative of the larger universe of customers. How do you balance listening to individual customers and creating a tool that many people can use?
I think it's partly based on the space that we're in. You get a lot of consistency from HR leaders and finance leaders. There's certain things that we absolutely need in software. We need compliance. We need things to be able to process through payroll. Now, how someone wants something laid out on a page, that can definitely change from person to person. The way we've managed prioritization here is, we take all that feedback. I mean, it's gold, honestly. The feedback we get from our customers is absolute gold. It's rarely about new features, though, and much more about workflows for them. So once we start hearing a pattern of the same kind of challenge within our customer base in particular, we move that up the roadmap, and then we build it. So for instance, we hadn't planned on supporting international employees for the first several years of our life cycle. We ended up building that much, much earlier because customers were asking for it. We were seeing even smaller companies, 25, 50 people, were having employees internationally that they also wanted to support. So we kind of jerry-rigged and reversed some of our product roadmap to support that, because we're like, okay, it's a trend. Let's make sure we're following that.
Yeah. And with the amount of use that you've got, you must also be seeing some trends in what those perks are that people are spending their money on, or am I getting too deep into the secret sauce?
No, not at all. I mean, what's fascinating is the breadth of what people will use. So we looked at 8,700 of our users last year and said, all right, 8,700 people, we just took a sample. We watched them for a year, watched them for 12 months and said, all right, how many different vendors could they possibly use? Because we're getting over 90% utilization from teams across everybody. So what that means is that to get that, we're getting closer to personalization. And what we found is that 8,700 people used 27,000 different vendors.
Wow.
27,000 different vendors. So when you think about personalization, every person needs 3 different things. So you just can't build a marketplace to solve the needs of your team. It's not possible. And even if you could build that, if I built 27,000 vendors into a platform, no one is scrolling through that to find the 3 things they want. That's never going to happen. So you've got to approach it a little bit differently.
Okay. Going to change path, change direction a little bit here. I want to ask you about building a company. I want to go back and think a little bit about those early days at Compt. One thing in particular, diverse team, early employees. Like, talk to me about your thought process there.
From day one, that was part of my mental process was, we are going to build a diverse team here. This is not something that you can wait and then retrofit. That rarely works for anybody. And so knowing that our platform is meant to reach everyone, it's basically any employee, you need to reflect humanity on your own team if you're actually going to solve the needs of, humanity, which crosses genders and races and geographies and all kinds of things. You need a lot of different approaches. So with that in mind, I thought about that as we were starting out. It started out myself, another woman who joined the team who, started day one with me basically on the marketing side. And we had a male engineer join about a month later. There was some diversity. You had some generational diversity between the three of us. I'm a lesbian founder. You get a little bit of kind of orientation diversity. You've got women, you've got men. Like we had a little bit, but we were also all white people. And that's going to build a very specific perspective into software if you start out that way. And so knowing that if you don't start early, you're going to have a problem. We specifically wanted to make sure we were getting diverse candidates basically from then on. Like, okay, no more. Like we've got to make sure we don't repeat this pattern. Not that we didn't have amazing people between the three of us, but you've got to make sure that you're pulling in other types of amazing people as well. And we just started building that early on, looking at not just somebody's, like making sure we were sourcing from diverse places. So not just going the easy route of like, who do we know from a last company? Because last company is usually, at least in my experience, 90% white guys from MIT, because, Boston-based tech companies, branching out and finding people who brought different types of skills that we wouldn't have found if we hadn't looked in new places. And so started that very early on. Right now we are, I believe, 63% female and 57% people of color.
That's great. Impressive. When you kind of start that, we're going to get funding, we're going to go into that, hyper growth push. It's not unusual for crazy hours to be the norm. And, you're committed to not asking your team to do more than 40 hours a week. I'm going to break this up into a couple of questions. Workplace culture today for you. Mm-hmm. Do you stick to 40 hours yourself?
Well, it depends on how you define 40 hours. So behind a computer, yes, I'm pretty good about that, actually. As a founder, and I think honestly with most of my team, it doesn't mean they're not thinking about the business. It doesn't mean that they're not networking with others and talking in the space and being very active in, the tech space or their local space or whatever. So there are other things that happen. They're not work mandated by any stretch, but there's other things that happen there. But behind a computer, I'm pretty good about sticking to, it's probably closer to 45 hours, but it's not 120, that's for sure. And so maintaining that, that was a day one thing. And it's honestly one of the hardest things to transition into our culture for a lot of folks, because they're used to being required to work so many hours and burn themselves out and ignore their, the expectation of, hey, you have to ignore your kids because I need X, Y, Z. We're just built differently here. And so adjusting to that and realizing, hey, it's okay. You're sick. Go take a nap. Like, what are you doing? Like, don't do in 5 hours what would take you 1 if you weren't sick.
All right. You mentioned burnout. How do you ensure your employees aren't heading for burnout? It's so hard these days with people working remotely. It's harder to tell.
It is harder to tell because you're not physically seeing them and seeing the physical cues of what's going on. We do on the way in, when people join the team, we do a whole survey on like, hey, how do you like working? What's your working style? What are things that are pet peeves? What are your tells of when you're starting to approach extreme stress levels or burnout? Like, help us understand a little bit more about you so that we can be mindful of that as well. Because we share that so they can see ours, like everybody gets to see everybody's kind of, hey, how do you like to work stuff? Because it is hard to get to know somebody remotely as well. And then we do pay a lot of attention. If we start seeing that somebody's hours are creeping up, where they just can't get through what they're working on, we focus on that. Do you need more resources? Do you need a different process? Do you need what's going on here? And how do we get this back to a more reasonable kind of space, and just keep a very open dialogue with the team.
Great. That sounds amazing. What a great onboarding process. What's next for you and for Compt?
Oh, we are going to have a very busy 18 months, I think, heading into this recession. The platform was designed and engineered to really support companies in times of need. My background, of course, as a CFO, I was a CFO in 2008. I understand the path that a lot of companies are going to be on. And we're seeing this within the market at large, and then also within our customers. There's a lot of layoffs happening in the tech industry in particular. Other parts of our customer base have already had those through the pandemic. It kind of depends on when it was hitting. But companies need a resource to really help them through that and to weather it in a way that's cost effective. So we have a lot going on to make sure that we can support those companies.
Great. All right. Looking forward to seeing what's next. And once again, we've been talking with Amy Spurling. She is the founder and CEO of Compt. Thanks, Amy.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much.